as we look at the past, I would hope we can get inspired by looking at the craftsmanship and looking at the details and long to build better because we see beautiful things like this. So the rise of the city. I'm going to mainly focus on Chicago. It was one of the fastest growing cities in the country for many decades. And if you remember, if I can go back to one of these maps, right? Chicago's right here, okay? And the reason Chicago grows, and if you remember when we talked about the 1860s, that the most populous cities were on the East Coast, but then Buffalo, which was Erie Canal and the lakes. Chicago had another canal, and we talked about Cincinnati last time, right on the Ohio River, that because of the railroad, because of canals, because of steam-powered steamboats, right, that could move up and down, there was like 5 cities where they were in the top 5 cities. New Orleans was one, St. Louis, Cincinnati, Chicago, and Buffalo, right, were big cities at that time. So Chicago, because it's connected to the Great Lakes, because the Erie Canal, it essentially, you can go from Chicago to New York and ship goods and services. They have another canal, just like Cincinnati did, that connected them to the Mississippi River. Therefore, it's connected to St. Louis and New Orleans, becomes a very important city. It grew so fast, though, that they had all kinds of problems, okay? Sewage was running backwards into the city. And so they had a tremendous, they had to basically engineer the river so that it flowed out of the city instead of into the city, because they were dumping their sewage into the lake, but it would just float back into the city. It was terribly dirty, right? But that highlights the fact that cities were growing so fast, no one knew, right? It wasn't like there was a model, oh, this is what you do when you grow by 1 million people, right? And so they're growing very fast. It's the fastest growing city for very long. It has the railroad. It's a huge railroad hub that has the canal. All this technology happening is right on the edge of the West. Things are expanding from there. In 1871, there's a huge fire. And by 1900, they're the 5th largest city in the world, right? So the technology and the engineering and the other things that they did to rebuild their city, one of the reasons you have so many high-rises in Chicago is because it burnt down and they had this opportunity to rebuild. At the same time, the technology for how you did a high-rise changed, right? So the limit on a high-rise, because of masonry, just what a brick could support, was about 10 floors, okay? So they would build these high-rises and they would have 6 feet of brick at the base going up to about 2 feet at the top, okay? So they had all this, they had to engineer it so that it could stand up to that height. At the same time, they then started putting steel in, was that 1891, right? And that's what this building is one of the very first steel skyscrapers, which allowed them to go to like 16 stories, okay? Allowed them to go much taller, and you begin to see, after 1890, buildings getting taller and taller. This is the Fisher Building, 1895. And so realize that what this means is that we're no longer building traditionally, okay? We are no longer having masons build up a tall building. You are having a steel frame and you're hanging materials from the steel frame. Very different way of building. The other thing that you have to think about is, how do you plumb a building that's 16 stories tall, right? What kind of infrastructure do you have to have the plumbing pipes come down the wall? Where is it going, right? What kind of, you're changing the whole city's infrastructure, plumbing system. How do you get water pressure at the top of a building, right? All of these different things that you don't really think about are happening in this 20, 30-year period between 1870 and 1890 as they're figuring this thing out. Another thing that happened in 1899, there was a very important book called How the Other Half Lives. And it was all pictures of tenement housing in New York, okay? And pictures like this of the kids sleeping in the street and the filth and squalor and the trash and everything else changed the way people thought about, cities, right? Changed the way people, they were like, it was an aha, uh-oh moment where they looked at what was happening in their cities and they were like, something's got to change. We've got to do something better. At the same time, In 1876, there's the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, okay? That is the 100-year anniversary of our country, okay? Remember World's Fairs, okay? There used to be something before the internet. The very first one, 1851, is in London with the Crystal Palace, right? That's where Samuel Colt brought his revolver, and they were freaked out that they had the revolver with interchangeable parts. So after 1851, all these countries are kind of jumping over each other, and it became a big engineering fair. Okay, it became a big thing where, you know, every country came in to show off what they were doing and what was going on. The other one was in Chicago in 1893, and this was called the White City. Okay, if you've read Eric Larson's book Devil in the White City, it's all about a serial killer that also is a part of, you know, the building of the White City. This is huge, okay? And the Centennial Exposition starts it. We're going to visit this again when we talk about the arts and crafts period, because there's a Japanese pagoda, which is very influential on Green and Green and Frank Lloyd Wright. And they look at that thing, and the whole Japanese architecture comes because they see a pagoda at the Chicago's exposition. So this is a very influential thing. It's also influential because it changes the way cities think about growth and the way cities think about how they, manage things. One of the things this exposition did was it had a very, I think it was on like 16 or 26 acres. It was a ton of land, and it was very organized, okay? And so they looked at the great architecture of Europe and said, the grand boulevards and the parks and the organization and the beauty of those European cities, they are trying to capture here. And so there was very distinct canals. There was axes where things would line up and you would see things. It was organized very beautifully, and it became incredibly influential for city planners. Now, we're going to talk about all these architects because there's a bunch of very important architects that worked here. But this starts what's called the City Beautiful movement. And we were just in Coral Gables, Florida. Anybody been to Coral Gables? There's the Biltmore there. That was a City Beautiful city, okay, that basically was organized and laid out according to these axes that had at ended points. You had beautiful boulevards, you had fountains that you would drive around, very European. And many U.S. cities began to design their parks and their systems because of this exposition. Very important. The McMillan Plan, 1901, the mall in Washington, D.C. Remember we were talking about, in the first one we were talking about A.J. Downing, the horticulturist. Okay, he had a plan for the mall. He was asked to redesign the mall, and instead of having the open grass, he actually had English gardens in the mall, if you can imagine that. It never got built, but he had a whole design for the mall. But this was, we had L'Enfant's plan from when we talked about the federal period and the rise of Washington, D.C. He had this plan. They take it over in this thing and say, we're going to accomplish this beautiful thing. 1922, the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, all of those are part of the City Beautiful movement, creating these axes and these beautiful monuments that are part of giving back to the people of the city, right? This is a way that the city should serve its people by creating beautiful spaces so that they have a wonderful place to live. Now realize the tenement problem, right, with the trash and everything else, it takes 20, 30 years for these things to develop and happen, but New York had a plan in 1902, Buffalo, New York, I have that picture. San Antonio Riverwalk, that was part of the City Beautiful movement, right, which is pretty cool. This is in Philadelphia. That's the Philadelphia Museum. This is called the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. You can see the design for it here. There's the Philadelphia Museum here, and then just keep an eye on her, okay? That is Gaudin's Diana. This is the ICAA, but just remember her. Okay, she's sitting right in there. But this is all part of their plan. I went to Buffalo, and you know, when you see monuments like these with the lions and the obelisk and the city hall here, and you see the way this is laid out, and Frederick Law Olmsted helped lay out the city. It's a garden city, beautiful accesses, wonderful things to look at. That's all part of that City Beautiful movement.